On the morning of July 29, 1967, USS Forrestal was preparing to send another strike into the air over North Vietnam. The carrier sat in the Gulf of Tonkin with its flight deck crowded by armed aircraft. Jets were fueled, bombs were loaded, rockets were mounted under wings. Pilots waited in cockpits while deck crews moved between machines that were already carrying war into the sky. Everything on that deck was dangerous. Then one rocket fired by accident. A Zuni rocket from an F-4 Phantom shot across the flight deck and struck an A-4 Skyhawk waiting nearby. In a normal strike mission, that rocket was supposed to leave the carrier over enemy territory. Instead, it crossed a few yards of steel and started a disaster at the center of the ship. The rocket hit the A-4's fuel area. Fuel spilled out and ignited almost instantly. Flames spread beneath aircraft packed close together for launch. Men who had been preparing for an airstrike were suddenly standing inside one. At first, the crew still had a chance. The first fire party rushed toward the flames. Chief Aviation Boatswain's mate, Gerald Farrier, and his men moved in to cool the bombs and stop the fire from reaching the point where the weapons would explode. That was the fight they understood. Get water and foam on the fire, cool the ordnance, keep the deck alive. But Forrestal's deck held a danger they did not fully see. Some of the bombs loaded that day were older weapons. They did not give the crew the cooling time they expected. The men running into the fire believed they had minutes. They had seconds. About a minute and a half after the fire began, the first major bomb detonated. The blast tore through the flight deck and killed many of the men closest to the fire, including key firefighters who had been trying to stop the disaster while it was still small. It blew holes through the deck. It scattered burning fuel. It turned a flight deck fire into a ship-wide emergency. From that moment, Forrestal was fighting for survival. The explosion did not end the fire. It opened the ship to it. Burning fuel poured through holes in the deck and dropped into compartments below. Smoke filled passageways. Heat moved through steel. Sailors below heard the blasts overhead and waited for orders while the carrier shook around them. On the flight deck, more aircraft were burning. More ordnance cooked off as heat spread across the crowded deck. Each new explosion created more wreckage, more fire, and more wounded men who had to be pulled away before the next blast came. The trained fire party had been shattered early, so the fight passed to sailors across the ship. Men who had not expected to lead a disaster response became firefighters, stretcher bearers, ammunition handlers, and damage control crews in the same hour. They had to clear bombs from the heat. They had to push burning aircraft over the side. They had to drag wounded sailors across a deck that could explode again at any moment. They had to seal compartments below before smoke and fire moved deeper into the ship. Every decision had a timer attached to it. A bomb left too close to the flames could tear open another section of deck. A hatch left unsecured could feed smoke into another space. A blocked passageway could trap men below. The carrier was not only burning upward from the deck, it was being attacked from inside by heat, fuel, smoke, and broken steel. Nearby, ships moved to help. But the first battle belonged to Forrestal's own crew. They pulled hoses through smoke. They flooded burning fuel with foam. They searched for trapped men. They carried the injured away from wreckage. They fought fires above and below deck while explosions continued to break through the noise. For hours, the carrier looked like it might not survive the morning. This was the cruelest part of the disaster. No enemy aircraft had reached the ship. No missile had come from the coast. No torpedo had struck below the waterline. Forrestal had been wounded by a chain reaction that began on its own flight deck, surrounded by the weapons it was preparing to launch. By the time the fires were finally controlled, the cost was devastating. 134 men were dead. More than 160 were injured. 21 aircraft were destroyed. The flight deck was torn open, and the carrier that had begun the morning preparing to strike North Vietnam was now fighting simply to stay alive. But Forrestal did stay alive. That survival came from damage control. Sailors sealing spaces, cooling weapons, moving ammunition, cutting through smoke, and refusing to let the fire take the ship, one compartment at a time. The first explosion had taken away many of the specialists. The rest of the crew had to become the system that saved the carrier. The fire changed the Navy because it exposed a brutal truth. On a warship, danger is not only outside the hull. It can sit on the deck, hang under a wing, wait inside a bomb casing, or run through a fuel line. A carrier is powerful because it concentrates aircraft, weapons, fuel, and people in one place. That concentration is also what makes it vulnerable. After Forrestal, the Navy looked harder at ordnance safety, firefighting training, flight deck procedures, and the way every sailor was prepared for damage control. The lesson was paid for in fire. When disaster starts on a warship, there may be no time to wait for the experts. Everyone becomes part of the fight. On July 29th, one accidental rocket turned a US supercarrier into an inferno. Forrestal survived because its crew fought the ship back from the edge. One hose, one hatch, one compartment at a time. Next, we look at another carrier disaster, the USS Enterprise flight deck explosion that proved the lessons of Forrestal still had to be learned the hard way.